My X-Men.
I love Stranger Things. This 80s era coming of age story about teens experiencing superpowers and alternate dimensions captured my heart from the very first episode. And if you watch my reaction to the series, then you're already aware that Stranger Things is heavily inspired by the X-Men, one of Marvel's premier superhero groups. However, it's not just inspired by the X-Men, it exists almost as a love letter to this series of comics that really inspired a lot of kids growing up in the 80s and 90s. And if you love Stranger Things too, then you have the X-Men to thank for it. Because without the X-Men, it's possible that the Duffer Brothers may have never been able to craft such an amazing story. What's up, humans? I'm Steven, and this is how Stranger Things is a love letter to the X-Men. Now, in order for me to explain the connection between the X-Men and Stranger Things, I must first explain to you how the X-Men work within Marvel Comics, as well as their cultural relevance in the real world. Within Marvel Comics, there are a number of different ways heroes acquire their abilities. There's the scientific, where people gain their powers through experimentation or scientific accidents. The cosmic, where humans are imbued with power through space travel or interdimensional beings. The supernatural, which are magical abilities, and then there are mutants, humans who are born with mutated genes that grant them special abilities. This is the category the X-Men belong to. The arrival of mutants on Earth sparked a lot of controversy within the Marvel landscape. Although superpowered individuals have been around for a long time, people being born with abilities marked the next stage of evolution and signaled the beginning of the end of Homo sapiens. This caused a mass panic within humans across the globe, and ever since, mutants have been ostracized and discriminated against, despite still being a part of humanity and having no control over their genetic makeup. You're probably already beginning to see what this is an allegory for. The X-Men have always represented the marginalized, racial minorities, the LGBTQ community, and really anyone who's felt rejected for being different through no fault of their own. This is why the X-Men specifically has always been a very popular comic series and has inspired many creatives who work in the entertainment industry today. So what does this have to do with Stranger Things? Well, on just the surface level, our group of main characters consists of almost all outcasts within their own universe. Not to mention Eleven, a girl who is born with abilities, is literally a mutant. But it does go much deeper than that. Just like the mutant gene, the X-Men runs deep within the DNA of Stranger Things. In the very first episode, when Will and Dustin are racing home and the winner gets a comic of their choice, Will shouts, Now what if I told you this throwaway line actually foreshadowed the entire first season of Stranger Things and could possibly be foreshadowing what's to come in season 5? Uncanny X-Men Volume 1, Issue 134 is the end of the very first Hellfire Club arc and the beginning of the Dark Phoenix arc. The issue takes place at the headquarters of the Hellfire Club, another loose X-Men reference that eventually appears in Stranger Things. In this issue, the X-Men are attempting to save Jean Grey, a prominent member of their team. She is currently being brainwashed by the Hellfire Club, who is making her fight for their side. Ultimately, Cyclops, the love interest of Jean Grey, is able to break through her brainwashing and remind her of the hero that she is. Compare that to the first season of Stranger Things, and you find a lot of similarities. Eleven was raised in a lab and being trained as a weapon by a shady organization. This caused Eleven to believe that she herself was indeed the monster and the villain of the show. It's not until she meets the boys that she discovers her true path in life, and Mike even confirms for her that she is, in fact, a hero. The similarities become even more apparent when you compare the characters of Eleven and Jean Grey. Jean Grey is a powerful telepath who can move objects with her mind, create psychic links with other people, stun enemies with a powerful psionic blast, and project her mind and the mind of other people into the astral plane. And although Eleven is not classified as a telepath, we have seen her accomplish all of these feats in the first 4 seasons of the show. We can take it a step further when we compare their backstories. Jean's power first manifested when she started hearing the thoughts of her dead friend. Her mother took her to a man by the name of Professor Charles Xavier. When the professor realized the extent of her abilities, he placed mental blocks on Jean to keep her powers from becoming too much for her. In doing this, he accidentally introduced her to the astral plane, which connected Jean to a being called the Phoenix Force. The connection unlocked an almost unlimited wellspring of power within the young girl. Eleven shared a similar experience with Dr. Brenner, who sought to control her abilities and inadvertently introduced her to the Void, connecting her with the Demogorgon and setting forth the chain of events of Season 1. It can even be argued that all of the characters in our main group resemble mutants from the comics. Dustin is reminiscent of Forge, whose mutant ability allows him to create and construct any device he can think of. Dustin has shown immense ingenuity over the course of the show, coming up with creative plans and building electronics like Cerebro. Will, while it hasn't been 100% confirmed yet, is presumed to be gay. If he does come out in Season 5, he would represent Northstar, a mutant who was the first openly gay character in Marvel. Will's arc in Season 3 of shifting back and forth between dimensions is also similar to the mutant Kitty Pryde, who can phase shift through any object, including dimensions. Lucas, being the only black kid in the group and living in a predominantly white town, could represent one of the many mutants whose genetic mutation extends to their physical appearance, causing them to look different from the other people around them. Max reminds me of Moira McTaggart, a human outsider who works alongside the X-Men as their liaison of human affairs. This reference will become even more relevant if Max actually gains abilities in Season 5, as it's eventually discovered that Moira McTaggart has mutant abilities of her own. And if 11 represents Jean Grey, that would make Mike Cyclops, or Scott Summers, the leader of the X-Men on field missions. He's also the love interest of Jean Grey. The two share such a bond that they're always telepathically linked, much like how we see 11 keeping tabs on Mike through the Void during Season 2. And I know you guys are wondering, what about Nancy, Jonathan, and Steve? Well, Stranger Things doesn't just draw inspiration from the X-Men, but from a number of comics, both Marvel and DC. Jonathan and Nancy are like the classic reporter-photographer duo from the Daily Planet, Lois Lane and Jimmy Olsen. And Steve really reminds me of Flash Thompson from Spider-Man, a douchebag jock who actually has a heart of gold and eventually becomes a hero in his own right. Now, I'd just like to point out that these are loose references. The Duffer Brothers crafted an amazing story and wonderful characters who stand just fine all on their own. The references to the comics exist more as Easter eggs for comic readers. You may interpret these characters completely different from how I perceive them and may actually find them to be more similar to other characters within comics or pop culture. And if you do, I would love to hear your comparisons down in the comments. So earlier I stated that X-Men 134 could possibly be foreshadowing what's to come in Season 5, and I'm getting to that, but first I must talk about one specific episode. Season 2, Episode 7, The Lost Sister. Now I know this episode was not particularly well received by a lot of Stranger Things fans, but I personally loved it, and I think it could be one of the most important episodes in the entire series, both as it relates to the X-Men and for the future of the show. In comics, there are these issues called tie-ins. Ultimately, what they do is to give more background information on the current arc that's happening, as well as give a little bit of clues to what's going to happen in future arcs once this arc is completed. For instance, Civil War was a huge arc within Marvel Comics where the superhero community was divided in half. Iron Man and the heroes who all chose to register their identities to the US government against Captain America and all the heroes who chose to keep their identities secret. During this arc, a series of tie-ins called Frontline were being produced about two reporters interviewing heroes on both sides of the war, as well as everyday citizens who were being affected by the war. The Frontline issues provided so much context that couldn't be found within the pages of the Civil War issues and really rounded out the world. The Lost Sister episode, for all intents and purposes, exists as a tie-in in the Stranger Things universe. Up until this point, 11 had never really been faced with the one thing that all heroes must face: a choice. In Hawkins' lab, she was forced to do the will of Dr. Brenner. Then in the town of Hawkins, she sided with the boys for survival and a need for friendship. But in this episode, she is represented with an option: use your powers for good or use them for revenge. The only difference between a hero and a villain is what they use their abilities for. The hero chooses to use their powers in service of others, while the villain chooses to use them in service of themselves. When 11 is presented with the option and chooses to return to Hawkins and save her friends rather than get revenge, this signals the true beginning of her heroic journey. This actually leads me to my final X-Men comparison of the show. In Marvel, there has always existed two main mutant groups: the X-Men and the Brotherhood. The Brotherhood of Evil Mutants, who were led by Magneto, existed as an antithesis to the X-Men. While the X-Men fight for a world where humans and mutants can live together in harmony, the Brotherhood seek mutant superiority. It is the classical philosophical ideology all oppressed persons eventually face. Do you seek to overthrow your oppressor, or do you seek a harmonious future among them? Neither philosophy is inherently wrong, it's more about your own personal moral compass and whether or not you can live with your decision. This is the dilemma that the episode places in front of Eleven. Does she choose to return to Hawkins and save her friends, or does she seek vengeance upon those who stole her life? The crew that she meets in Pittsburgh are reminiscent of the Brotherhood, people who were cast out from society and seek revenge on those who marginalized them. While the crew in Hawkins are like the X-Men, people who fight for the safety of their town in spite of being labeled as outcasts. So now we get to what I believe is in store for the future of Stranger Things. Remember how I said this line could possibly be foreshadowing what's to come in season 5? Well, at the end of X-Men issue 134, Jean Grey becomes the Dark Phoenix, one of the most powerful beings ever seen in Marvel Comics. And if you run a Google search for a list of her powers, which there are a lot of, you'll see one in particular: matter manipulation, which is really just another way of saying reality warping. Now, if you watch my reaction to the show, you probably already know where I'm going with this. Over the course of the first 3 seasons of the show, we're led to believe that we have a good idea of Eleven's powers and her limitations. For seasons 1 through 3, her powers could best be described as control of the electromagnetic spectrum. Her telekinetic abilities are a result of her manipulating the electrons and protons of objects to make them move, or electromagnetism. The only plot hole in this theory is 8, whose ability seems to be completely different from everyone else. But don't worry, we'll get to that in a moment. In season 4, we discover that all the children's abilities are derived from Henry, or Vecna. But Henry's ability is not control over the electromagnetic spectrum. It's reality warping on a universal scale. Within comics, reality warping is the most powerful ability that anyone can have, because it means that you can change or do anything. Reality literally bends to your will. Now let's look at reality warping in terms of real life. The definition of reality is the world or state of changes as they actually exist, as opposed to an idealistic or notional idea of them. However, this definition is a bit deceiving. Let me explain. If I were to ask any of you what the color of the sky is, at least 90% of you would say blue. And you'd be correct in saying that. However, the sky isn't blue. The sky is black, like space. But sun rays make us perceive the sky as blue. And because the majority of humans on Earth perceive the sky to be blue, that makes the statement, "the sky is blue," factual, even though that's not the true color of the sky. So this is what's called the collective consciousness, or the collective reality. Yes, reality is subjective. Different people perceive different things in this life. However, there are things that almost everyone perceives to be the same. All of these things come together to create the collective reality. If someone were to come along and make everyone perceive something to be different than it is, that thing would now be the new collective reality, much like how the sun makes us perceive the sky as blue. This, my friends, is the power of reality warping. Now, doesn't that sound very familiar to a certain someone's ability? Yes. Callie would be considered a small-scale reality warper in comics. She can manipulate the subjective reality of one or a few people for a temporary period. If she's able to learn how to manipulate the objective reality, she would become a reality warper on a universal scale. But why are her abilities like this? Well, as I stated earlier, Henry is a universal reality warper. So technically, all of the children have the same abilities as Henry. Dr. Brenner, much like Professor Xavier, sought to control the children's abilities. So it would make sense that he would never bother teaching them how to use all of their abilities. Instead, he only taught them to control the ones that best served his mission. This means that 11 is also a reality warper on a universal scale. This is why each season we see her accomplish even greater feats than before. It's why she was able to say no and bring Max back to life. This show has been breadcrumbing us this information ever since season 1. Mike at one point even says,
"You can do anything. You can fly. You can move mountains. I believe that."
11 can literally do anything, which in most cases would make her an OP and uninteresting character. But the fact that we've gotten to spend 4 seasons growing and learning with her, at this point we want her to be as powerful as ever. And I truly believe that by the end of season 5, 11 will be the most powerful person on the face of the planet. Well, that's going to do it for today's video, guys. Thank you so much for joining me. Remember to drink some water, and if no one's told you today, just know that I love you. Peace out, everybody.